Okay, so the goal here is to get it to where y'all would be comfortable to pick up one of these service tools and be able to plug into a thermostat, one of the ones that looks like this over here on the wall, and look at the room temperature, that sort of thing, and perhaps command outputs to be able to diagnose what's wrong with the box. By show of hands, just really quick, just so I know, how many can do that already? And out of comfort level, who's comfortable with it? I mean, like totally no problem. Okay, so we got a pretty. This is a perfect setup then. So you see right here, I'm plugging into this board right here. No different than if I plug into the bottom of that thermostat. There's like a jack that I plug in the bottom of that thermostat. And this is my service tool. Okay. And I plug my wire in my service tool. And I always want to make sure there's a switch on this service tool. And I always want to make it point that way. I can put that switch going this way, but it needs to go that way. And I don't think any of your service tools will ever have them switch this way unless somebody was just playing with it and left it in the wrong position. But that switch always needs to be that direction. Okay? So I'm going to plug into this card right here. And if you look at this tool here, first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn it on. And it says copyright 1987. Okay? So now I'm going to hit this button over here, enter. And after it did that, it came up and said, hey, controller connection. So this has the ability to connect to both the controller or the trunk. For your purposes, don't ever even worry about the trunk. I'm always just going to connect to the controller. Okay, so I'm going to push the enter button. Enter. Notice it connected to the controller. Sometimes it might have a little flashing thing there that says reading, and takes a little bit of time to connect, and sometimes, depending upon the way the card's set up, it connected just as quickly as I saw there. So now what do we see there? You see how it says input values and output values, and there's a little arrow next to the output values? See that? So if I take this scroll button right here where my thumb is, and I move it, notice that that went down to the output values. Trying to see if I can move that to where you can see better. So look, I actually have more than output values. I have application status, and I can keep scrolling down here, and I scroll through all these things. Notice that the group of numbers, the group of things are numbered, and what happens is there's 10 parameters inside of each one of those. So, for example, the input definitions is the 70s series. Okay, so what happens is I can just keep scrolling around. Look at this. I can keep scrolling around to 90s, and then after the 90s, right, it goes to A's, then B's, and then back, it looped itself back around to the 0. Okay? And so now I'm on input values. Now, if I push this enter button, I went inside the inputs, and I'm actually seeing the very first parameter, which is 0, 0, which is zone temperature. Now this is just wired up to this thing on the table, so it's not showing a very good value at the moment. But in your particular case, if we went and plugged over in the wall, you'd be seeing that's what the temperature is of the room. Okay, so now if I hit EXT, I come back out, right? So EXT brings me back out to the input values, or where I'm scrolling by tens. You see how if I scroll up and down, I'm going by tens? If I come back here and I go back and I hit enter, I'm now back to parameter number 0. Now notice that I can scroll, as I scroll here, I can scroll through 01, 02, 03, 04, and those are the inputs of the card. And the card only has 7s, but it still has those spaces in the registry for 10. So now I got to parameter number 10, right? Which if I hit the EXT button, look, it put me back out to where I was if I was scrolling by the 10s, which was output values, right? So I'm showing you how you can navigate. So think of this particular box that controls the room. It has these parameters in it that are grouped by parameters of 10, and I can navigate in here either by scrolling up and down in groups of 10, or if I hit enter, look at this, I'm on parameter number 50, then I can actually navigate here 54, 55, 56. I could just navigate one at a time, and I could go through all 130 values just by sitting here, right? Or if I could back out, right, and scroll by the tens, and then hit enter, and then come back in. Now here I'm on 91, 92, 93, 94. Okay. Now the other thing I can do, so I can scroll by hitting the EXT and coming out to the tens, and I could go back and I could hit enter on parameter 70, or if I actually know the parameter, I can just type in the parameter. So we knew that zone temperature was 0, 0, so I could hit 0, 0, enter, and see now if I wanted to go back to 71, I could go 71, enter. And it takes me right to that parameter. So I'm gonna go back to 0, 0, enter, right? Now if I hit EXT and I'm by the tens, notice if I try to go 51, nothing happens. I can't type in 51 if I'm in the tens. I've got to hit enter so that I'm in to where I'm scrolling by the individual parameters. And now I could go to parameter number 78, for example, which maybe isn't one. How about 74? And that's a parameter. Okay? So that's our most basic navigation. And for zones, 0, 0 is probably the most important thing I want to look at, right? And 0, 0 shows me what the zone temperature is. The next thing I can look at is if I go to input 1, this is generally where you're going to see the set point offset. Okay, so but in this particular case, since it's just this card on the table, it's not there. So I'm connecting again, and here I am. I'm looking at my zone temperature, right? And the next thing I care about, if I scroll down, is input number 1, which is the set point adjust knob. Okay, I care about that because I want to know, well, my zone temperature is this, but what's my set point? Well, is my set point 2? That's my offset, right? Now if I hit EXT and I go out to the tens, I'm going to come to one here that says set points. So I could hit enter on set points and I can see, look at this. My occupied cooling temperature is 72 degrees. And so then I could go down and my occupied heating temperature is 70 degrees, but my set point adjust knob was at 2. So that means my heating's at 72 and my cooling's at 74. Right? And so now if I go back here to 0, I can say now my zone sensor, am I within that range? And that would probably be the very most basic thing that I would do, right? Because if somebody's not happy, the first thing I should say to myself is, let's plug in and actually see if it's controlling to the temperature that we want. If we need to, we could lower the set point. Now, of course, the easiest way to lower the set point is just to turn the knob down, right? But you may have a thermostat that doesn't have a set point, in which case you could go here and you could scroll down to set points. You could hit enter, and then you could change the set points. However, as soon as you disconnect, whatever was in the main computer back at headquarters will write back down over the top of it. So you really have to go to the graphics to change the set point. But that's really simple and easy, and you all know how to do that, hopefully, as well, right? Okay.
You would be able to change that set point just to see if it goes into cooling mode or starts calculating up for heating mode.
Yes.
To make sure it's doing the function that it should.
That's exactly right. You'd be able to, as long as the service tool is in there, you could lower the set point and then say, did the room kind of go into cooling mode and did it start to cool? exactly, but
The Smart 2 overrides the computer as long as it's plugged into the device or the thermostat. As soon as you disconnect it, whatever program is in there is going to be dumped back into the system or set points.
yeah,
So it's a good way to find out, like if the guys are in the controls, and you're trying to make sure that you're on the right card, you can actually call them up and say, hey, can you see this in the graphics, or pull up the graphics? And if you connect and it goes to yellow, it tells you that that is no longer, that's the one you're working on, right? Because it's not communicating. So it's just an easy way to
Yeah. But it would be a mistake to say, I'm gonna go in and change your set point with a service tool,
Right.
and then walk out, right? I would change it, but it would last for maybe 5 minutes. And then whatever's showing there in your graphics would overwrite and control there. Now, what I could do is I could leave my service tool plugged in, and as long as the service tool is plugged in, then it would keep that set point
Until it powers itself down.
until it powers itself down. But I'll just show you here a little trick. If you go to function and you lower down here, you go scroll down here. Oh, define password, control, auto power off. I can make it so it won't automatically power off. If I hit enter on that, so I could say disable auto power off, and now this particular guy won't shut himself off in 5 minutes. And if I had him plugged into the power cord and stuck in the wall, then I did in fact change the set point, right? And as long as my service tool stays powered up, plugged into the wall, then it would keep that set point. And at the computer, as soon as we plug into the Smart 2, the computer, it shows it going into communications failure. Okay. All right. So I'm going to hit we're going to kind of go back to the beginning here. Ooh, controller connection. Okay. So we already said, hey, we could look at the inputs. And now looky here, we could look at the outputs, right? So this one is what drives the damper open and close. So is open on or off? Is close on or off? In this particular case, he's trying to close the primary air valve. And then there's no other outputs defined on this guy except for on parameter number 16. He's saying he's trying to heat 100%. Okay, this is me reading the outputs. I cannot control it from this series that says output values. All I can do is read what those outputs are. If I want to actually control it, I've got to keep scrolling in the tens until I get to this parameter here called on-off automatic. And now I could hit enter on this, and notice that that's parameter number 60, and it says you want to open the primary air valve, and right now it's set to automatic. But if I want to manual that, I would have to do it from this group. This was the manual group, okay? And in order to make it be that way, if you look right along in here, you see no icons here or here. And in order to change something, you got to have this little CH symbol over here. And the reason we can't change something is because we're not in the correct mode. We're in a read-only mode when we connected. And so we've got to change ourselves to what they call a commissioning mode, which allows us to actually make changes. I still see all the same parameters and everything. I'm just in a commissioning mode, and it'll allow us to do that. So what happens here is if I hit the function button, notice the first thing that comes up after I hit the function mode is set servicing mode. You see, I can scroll down. There's a whole bunch of things that I can do in function mode, but the most important one, or the one that we want to talk about right now, is set servicing mode. Okay, so now I'm going to hit enter on set servicing mode, and if you notice, if I scroll here, there's actually 3 modes. We are currently in the read-only mode. And that's the temporary mode, and that's the commissioning mode. And if I keep scrolling, it's just those 3. So I've kind of got it figured out that when I connect, it's right there. And rather than hitting the down arrow, I hit the up arrow, which immediately takes me to commissioning mode, and then I hit enter. Now I'm back to where I started when I pushed the function button. I'm on parameter number 60, but if you look real close in this little corner, there's a little CH there in that spot there, which means I can change it. So now I can hit the change button, and now I can scroll. I can say, I can turn that manual on, or I can turn it manual off, or I can turn it to automatic. So if I want to turn it on, I could hit on. Now if you notice, the little light just came on our board, which was lit up for output number 1, or output number 0, I should say. Okay, so if I want to put that back to automatic, I have to go change and then scroll to automatic and then hit enter, and that put that output back to automatic. One thing that's important to note here is if the software is writing to this particular point, he will show up right here as manual. So if you come to one of these parameters in the 60s and they say manual, chances are that means software is directly writing to that output. And if software is directly writing to that output, again, if I change it and then walk away, the software will then just overwrite what it was that it was writing. But if you come to one of these outputs that say automatic, okay, then if I wanted to, I could come to this particular guy here and I could say I'm going to change him. So I'll scroll him and I'm going to say I'm going to manual you on. And if I hit enter, that's going to stay in that position now. If it started out as automatic, it'll stay manualed on until that controller sees a power bump. So I could manual it on, and conceivably, I don't know how often you guys have power bumps around here, once every 2 months or something like that. Not that they're timed. Hardly ever have power bumps? Or are you being facetious? With all the construction, there's been power bumps, right? So sometimes you can go for a month without a power bump, sometimes you can't. But my point of it is you can manual the damper open, or you can manual the damper close. So let's manual, a very most common thing is let's manual the hot water valve so that I can verify whether or not it's heating or not, right? So what am I going to do? I'm just going to scroll down here through the outputs till I see the one that says terminal heat. There we go, terminal heat. So I'm going to hit change. And I'm going to scroll. And this particular one he's got a number attached to him. So now I hit enter. And now I could scroll to him and I could say, I'm going to manual you to 16%. And now I hit enter. And as soon as I hit enter, he's now manualed at 16%. And again, if I walk away from this controller, unplug and walk away, that will now stay there as long as it was automatic when you first came to it. That will stay there until it sees a power bump. So to one extent, there is a little bit of danger, right? That, hey, when I plug into this thing, I could manual some things, leave them in some spot, walk away, and I've maybe possibly created harm, right? So I'm going to show you a trick what I do when I leave. Just because I'm so forgetful, I might have manualed a whole bunch of things when I got here, right? So if I hit function button and I scroll down here, there's this one called reset controller. Every time before I disconnect from a controller, assuming that I'm not purposely trying to manual something, I scroll to that, I hit the function box and I scroll to that reset and I hit enter. And as soon as I hit enter, it takes everything that was in the card that was in manual and puts it to automatic.
But it doesn't take the program out.
It does not take the program out. No, it just says it makes sure everything goes back to automatic, right? So for me, I use this as a kind of a practice. When I leave a box, if I plug in a box and, I'm doing this, that, and the other, this, that, and the other, right? And I might have taken 3 phone calls, went to lunch, come back, or whatever. If I disconnect from a box, I always reset the controller. That way I know I haven't left a bunch of stuff in the controller. It's just good practice. Now, if you didn't ever manual anything, then don't worry about resetting it. But if you've been manualing various different things, then it's very good practice to do that reset. Okay, so let's go look at some other parameters inside this card. Okay? So we already talked about what on-off automatic is, right? And that's the 60s. Okay? I'm going to go backwards, and I'm going to go backwards. So there's, look at that, set points. We said that there's set points 1 and set points 2. And set point 1, by the way, was all the temperature set points, right? Occupied heating, occupied cooling, unoccupied heating, and unoccupied cooling. Okay? I'm going to go back out. Now I'm going to come to set points number 2. This is where I actually have the flow set points. And how much does this box flow when it's in XYZ modes? Okay? And so that's what set point 2 is these are all the flow set points. Okay? So I'm going to back out of that. So we've talked about those two. Now here's the one that I really wanted to show you is this application status. So I'm going to back up here. Remember, I plug into the card, I come, and I'm here 0, 0, and I want to see what the zone temperature is. Right? Then I compare it to set point. And then I think, well, it ought to be heating or cooling. If I come right here to this next parameter, is application status, he comes up and he tells me what he's thinking he's doing. In this particular case, this controller is heating 100%. Now, why would it be? I'm going to go to 0, 0. My zone temperature is 51, right? And we said my set point here was 72, 74 with the offset. So that makes sense that this particular card's gone to that heating, right? So if I'm going to go back out to the 10s, I'm going to come back to where I was showing you. I go to that application status and hit enter. He's thinking that he's heating. Okay? Now I'm going to scroll down and look what else he'll tell me. He'll tell me whether he thinks he's occupied or unoccupied. Okay? He'll tell me whether he thinks he's in warm-up mode. He'll tell me how much override time is left. These thermostats have a little button on them that you can put the controller in override mode by pushing that little button, and what that does is makes the card go occupied for a set specified amount of time.
Buttons. So any card that has an override button has been removed. You can
So
turn that
not
on.
something to worry about here, but yeah. Okay. Okay. Now this one here is really important, this parameter number 24, because this one is telling me what, after all my calculation this is telling me what my VAV box is trying to obtain in terms of flow. He's trying to obtain 150 feet per minute in this particular case. So now what happens is I can see what this is, and I can go to parameter number 03, which is the actual flow that he's at. That was bad grammar. The actual flow that that he's flowing. Okay, so right now this box, just because he's sitting here on the table, he thinks he's at 293, 300 feet per minute. So he's above set point. Okay, so just for fun, if he's above set point, we would be trying to close the VAV box, right? So we're going to go back to the 10s. So I'm going to go back to the 10s, right? And I'm going to look at my outputs. Look at that. Open primary air valve is off. Closed primary air valve is on. See that? So, the card's making sense, right? And I'm going to go back to the 10s. I'm going to come back out to application status and come back down here. So that's the things I wanted you to know about the application. Now, what if I wanted to actually just say, card, I want you to just go to 100% cooling. I can't change it right there at the 20 parameter because there's no CH there. Of course, there wouldn't be unless I'm in function mode in commissioning mode, which I think I disconnected. And so let's just make sure we're in commissioning mode. Oh, we were in commissioning mode. We are in commissioning mode, but see, there's no marks there, so I cannot manual the cooling and heating on this parameter. But if I hit and I go back to the scrolling by 10s, and I come out and I go to setup, Look at that. That's load calculation. This is where I could just manual the card and say, I want you to go hypothetically to cooling, 100% cooling. So because I see the little CH there in the corner, right?
Hello.
Ah, hi, somebody's trying to call me. I'm going to decline. It's too bad it wasn't my wife. I would show you what messages I have for her. It's okay for her to call me. I didn't mean that in a derogatory way. I was going to show you my humorous messages I have for her. Anyway, I'm just teasing. So, see how we got the change there?
Not recording.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so you see how we have the little CH there in the automatic? Okay, so if we have the CH there in the automatic, we can go change. I can scroll, and look at this, I could scroll. I can either go into heating, automatic, cooling, heating, automatic. So I get a pick, right? We already know this card's thinking 100% heating, so I'm going to manual it to 100% cooling. So I'm going to go hit enter on 100% cooling, and now I get a scroll and say, what value cooling do you want to make? I could make it 2% cooling, 98%. I'm going to actually say, go to 100% cooling, and I'll hit enter. So now the card, we just manualed that card at cooling. So we're going to go back and look at it in the 20s and see if it got it. Okay? We're going to go back here. We're going to scroll by the 10s. Application status, and we're going to hit enter, and it says control band. Sure enough, cooling 100%. What does that mean it should have done to our, if I scroll down here, it probably changed our flow set point. Override time, primary air volume control is now at 300 feet per minute, which, again, if I go and actually look at that input, and I go to parameter number 3, I'm basically at set point now. Okay? So that's some stuff, you know. My intent here is to just show you how to use the service tool. You'll have to also learn some more about the function of the controller, which would be a different class. Okay, so at this point, I want to just show you some of the other parameters in here. Okay, we're going to scroll by the 10s. We did application status, we did set points 2. We did setup, and we did on-off automatic. The next one here is this is where I get to tell it, when I wire something up to this card, say I wired up to XYZ input, this is where I go tell it what I have wired up to a card. Okay, so what I do here is I hit enter, and notice that now it's showing all the inputs, and it's telling me what it thinks is wired up to those inputs. So on input 0, it thinks it's a zone sensor. Input 1, it thinks it's set point adjust. So if I wanted to disable a set point adjust, for example, even though it's wired up, I could come here and I could go change, because I got the little CH there. Change. And now I could say unsigned counts, which is kind of it saying nothing. And I hit enter. And now I've basically told it that there's nothing wired up to the input. And that's how, so the card is a multifunction card. You wire up various things to inputs, and then you go define the inputs. And so that's what this group called the input definitions is all about, is telling the card what's wired up to it. What do you think the next one is? The next one's output definitions. It's telling the card what's wired up to the outputs, right? So if I hit enter on this, I can see that it thinks it has a primary cool damper wired up to digital output 0. It thinks it has a primary cool damper wired up to digital output 1. It doesn't think it has anything wired up to output 2, output 3, output 4, output 5. It thinks it has a terminal heat valve wired up to output 6. And it doesn't think it has anything wired up to output 7, and that's all the outputs there are. I use this to see what's wired up to the card. I walk into a room, I don't have a wiring diagram, I don't have anything, but I can plug in and see what it thinks it has wired up. Right? It may be something you never need to actually change yourself, but it's really good to be able to just plug in there and say, well, what does this zone even have? Maybe it's a cooling only zone, it doesn't have a reheat valve. Maybe it has two reheat valves. Maybe it has a perimeter heat valve. Maybe it has, various things. Maybe it's a fan-powered box, that type of a thing. So that's what the output definitions are. Output scaling allows me to scale the outputs of the card. So that, for example, if I wanted to say maybe the valve is a 0 to 5 volt valve, but this puts out 0 to 10 volts, I could say just scale it to 50%. That's what the output scaling is all about, okay? And then the same thing, I have an input scaling. Now this one here, this configuration, this one's important. And the reason why this is important is if you ever had to discuss things with the control shop, the guys who are doing the controls, and you say, I got a problem with XYZ controller, they may want to know what address that controller is. So if I came to the 10s and I hit enter on configuration, the first parameter, B0, is the controller address. In this particular case, the address of this controller is 26. And again, there's a little CH there, so if I needed to change the address of this controller, I could change that address. This is very important too, because if I replaced a card, I want to find out what was the address of the card before I replaced it. And then I want to change the address to put it back to what it was after I've replaced the card. So I would want to know what is my address. And this is where I would see it, and this is where I would change it. There are other things here in the configurations which, aren't, gives you the model firmware, the baud rate, just some other items here that don't really, aren't very basic, or you don't probably need to really worry about them. Okay? So now I want to tell you about one other function that we have. I'm going to hit EXT, go back out to the 10s, just because it takes me home. I like to go right back to home. If I go to home and I know where I am, oh, I'm at 70, I want to go to the zeros. So I'm going to the zeros, there I am, input 0. Okay, if I'm replacing a card, I'd like to take the programming out of this card and put it into the new card exactly the way this card's programmed. Now what I could do is go to every single one of those parameters and write down what they were. What was 0, 0, what was 0, 1, what was 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, write them all down so that when I put the new card in, I then go reprogram every, what is there, about 130 points in there. That would work, but that takes a lot of time and sounds tedious, doesn't it? But this tool has the ability to take the brains out of the card, put it into the tool, then unplug from that card, plug it into a new card, and then put the brains back down into the card. So I'm going to show you that functionality
It
now.
has to be the same version of the same card,
Well,
though.
as long as it's not version, I think it's got the ferrule fuse, right? That's the only version.
I've never had a problem version-wise myself. Take the
I've only had a couple,
okay,
just because I didn't have whatever version I
Right.
was replacing,
right.
and I did have to write them all
Okay.
down.
Is that right? Okay.
The oldest
The
card
cards
out
have to
there
be
that
the
we
same
have.
type though, right, Russ?
They do have to be the same type. It has to be a a smart VAV card,
Yeah,
and that sort of stuff. But I haven't ever, me personally, I haven't ever found that there's a problem from version to version with cloning a card. Not saying that that problem doesn't exist, but I would generally say to you, don't worry about that. That's a general statement, not a specific statement. Okay, so look what we're going to do. We're going to hit the function button. And every time we hit the function before, we were going into that set service mode, right? In this particular case, we're going to just scroll down till we see one here that says clone Smart 2 controller. You see that? It's clone Smart 2 controller. And now I'm going to hit enter. And it says clone controller, hit any key to begin. So it now has sucked up all the information out of that card, and I could disconnect from that card, replace that card, plug back in to the new card, and now I could hit enter.
Yeah, I think
You gotta read
Oh,
that.
well, this is first sucking it out. Okay, so this is, excuse me, this is, so what it's first doing right now is collecting all the data. It says ready to clone, hit enter when connected. So, well, I don't know, I believe that's, so now we'll hit enter. Now it's writing. So in this particular case, I just took what's out of the card, and now I'm writing back what's into the, But this is how I would replace a card. Or let's say I wanted to make a change, but I wanted to apply it to the entire floor. I could go make the change in one card, and then suck up that database, and then go plug into all the rest of the thermostats down the hall and make the change by just cloning it. Which is scary to do. You shouldn't be doing that, but that's what we do when we start up a building. Okay? So, and he's set up to where he could just sit there and repeat. So after he got done, he said, hey, I'm ready to do it again. Until I say, no, you're done. Okay? So he does not change the address. Oh, I accidentally hit enter again, so we're writing to it again. He does not change the address when he does a clone. So he sucks up everything but the address. And then I've got to go put the address back the way it was.
So write down the address before you do this.
Yeah, you need to write down the address of the old card because the new card needs to have that same address. And cloning it will not put the new address in. Will not put the existing address in. It just leaves it the same address that whatever the card came. Okay, so now I'm going to hit EXT to get out of that mode. And it takes me back to where I'm just supposed to be connected. So I'm going to go ahead and connect again. So I want to look and just see if there's anything else in this function thing that I want to tell you about. I'm going to hit function. We talked about set servicing mode. Units of measure, that's where you could change it to metric. Enter monitor mode. EEPROM direct access mode, I've never used that. Clone, we just talked about. Reset controller, I already showed you. Reset latched input, I don't even know what that is, so I wouldn't worry about it. Define custom engineering units. Sometimes this controller comes with set engineering units, but let's say I needed to have one that was something special, I could create one. These are things you're not going to really do. You could put a password into this such that you're the only one. When you connect up to the service tool, you have to put in a password. The default password is 255, so if somebody else has put in a password, I've just told you how to overwrite it. You put in 255 and it'll always work. I do not believe on campus we put passwords anywhere. It's just a hassle, and it's just not necessary.
I have, early on, I came across a few that had passwords on them, but was able to get around it and clear the passwords, so didn't need it.
Right. Okay, control auto power off, which we talked about. So that's pretty much it. That's how you use a Smart 2 service tool. Now let me just show you some things you might see. Okay, I'm going to disconnect this. See, I'm disconnected. I'm going to power this on. You might plug into a controller, a thermostat on the wall. But in fact, that may not be powered up. But the thermostat is still on a wall, and you may plug into it expecting to connect, right? So in this particular case, look, I've got the cable right here. I'm going to show you what happens. I'm going to say connect. He's trying to connect, but he comes up and he says terminal unit, CLEMO, right? And basically that says to me he can't connect, and it's either a connection issue or the card isn't powered up, right? I'm showing you this because in real life, that's what you're going to sometimes see. You're going to see the thing where it says terminal unit. Okay. Now I'm going to hit off. I'm going to hit back. I'll go back to enter. Oh, I've got to go back on. I'm going to show you one other piece of functionality here that's important now that I'm seeing it. So connect it up here. I'm going to hit enter so I can connect to the controller. And I'm going to go to commissioning mode because if I power down and power back up like I just did, I'm not in commissioning mode anymore. So I'm going to go function, enter on set servicing mode. I scroll up to commissioning mode. and then I hit enter. And now I'm back here at input. And if I look here, I'm looking at the zone temperature, but in the little left corner here, it isn't a CH, it's a CL. And CL means that I could calibrate it. Okay? So that's something that I may want to do, is to calibrate that zone sensor. I'm measuring 70 degrees, but when I plug in, parameter number 00 is saying 72. Okay, in this particular case, we're reading 51 degrees, because he's not really wired up to anything, but I'm going to show you how I'd calibrate it. So I could hit the calibrating button. I couldn't do it unless I see the little CL. The CL comes from being in commissioning mode. Okay, so I'm going to hit the cal button. And now I'm going to scroll, and I'm going to say, no, I really think it's 55 in here. And then I'm going to hit enter, and now I just calibrated that zone sensor. And I just added 4 degrees. In this particular case, I took it from 51 to 55. Now I got to caution you. If it's off more than a degree or two, there's some other problem than calibration. Okay? But if it's just a degree or two, hey, it's really 70 degrees in here and this thing's thinking it's 72 degrees. So go ahead and plug in with a service tool, go to commissioning mode, hit the calibrate button, and calibrate it down. This is how the balancer also calibrates the airflow with this same exact process. He goes to input 3, he measures the flow. In this particular case, we're saying it thinks it's got 293 CFM there. And we are going to calibrate it, because notice it's got a little calibrate thing there. We're really, oh, I think I hit function set. So I'm going to hit calibrate. And I'm going to tell it, you're not really 300, you're about 400 CFM. And that's how the balancer calibrates it. Right? He measures all the grills in the room. And he says, I got this flow, but the actual service tool is reading this other flow. So he comes in and he calibrates. Okay, how about questions? I'm going to turn it off. I'm going to turn it back on. Any questions? Going once.
So the 20s are inputs?
Okay, let's go see. Enter. The 20s are application status. That's where I can see what the card's thinking. Whether he thinks he's in heating or cooling, what he thinks his flow set point should be, whether or not he's in occupied mode, whether or not he's in warm-up mode, that kind of thing. That's what the 20s are.
Okay.
Good question.
Zeros are what? Can you go through each?
You betcha.
Just tell us.
So here we go. So we'll go right here. Zeros are input values.
You'll see it on your smart TV.
We'll say it.
We'll say the same thing.
The output values are to 10s. The application, they call it application status, is the 20s. 30s and 40s are set points. 40s or 50s is where I could actually manual the application. The 60s are where I could actually manual the outputs. 70s is where I could define what's wired to the card, but really in your case is where you get to look and see what the card thinks is wired to it, right? Tells you without having to have a wiring diagram in front of you what's wired to it. And then 80s are the output definitions. 90s is where I can scale the outputs. And then after the 90s I go to the A's, and that's input scaling. And then the configuration is the B's.